Down 24% to $305 million. Even though the market had been warned with several profit downgrades pretty much this year, right through this year, they were still surprised by this figure.
Well, I think as recently as a couple of months ago, Nicholas Moore was still trumpeting a predicted $900 million profit for the year, which was at least what it was last year. This result is an absolute disaster, as it has been for the last several quarters of Macquarie. That the return on equity Macquarie is now down to 5.7%, which is atrociously low. It's obviously partly due to that, in a sense, risk mitigation, but the Macquarie model, which was so effervescent in the mid sort of 2000s of taking these huge fees from satellites, is virtually completely dead. They've had to try and scramble and find other ways to make money, and they just haven't been able to. Quite a few of their divisions were down, a couple were loss-making. This is a horrendous result, and Macquarie shares $25, they were 98 pre-GFC, so this is a disastrous result. It's disastrous 3 or 4 years, Macquarie, and I personally wouldn't invest in them if you gave me the money.
Adam, do you think, is there a reason that you can put that down to? I mean, you know, sure, you can probably blame management for all sorts of things, but I mean, it is a tough market for them to forge a completely different direction.
Well, that's true, and not to say that it's actually Nicholas Moore's fault or anybody's fault, but it is what it is. And Macquarie is certainly not the only investment bank in the world that is very much been marked down from pre-GFC levels. Yes. I guess at least it's still solvent, albeit with some government help through wholesale funding and the like. But if you're a Macquarie shareholder buying it at $80 or $90 in 2007 and suddenly you've seen your investments shrink by 3/4, I can't imagine you'd be overly impressed with that result.
No, exactly. Andrew, do you agree?
Oh, certainly it might, but I guess if you're a Macquarie shareholder, in a sense what Andrew was saying, you're looking at the intrinsic value of the company, and that's effectively the present value of its future cash flows, and you'd be thinking, well, what are Macquarie's future cash flows going to be? I think what interesting to note, Macquarie's peak really coincided with Alan Moss, and boy, didn't he jump off at the right time. He sold pretty much every single share he had in Macquarie. Got about $80 million in share sales and remuneration in the last couple of years he was there. And since then, the share price has tanked 75%. And obviously, Bill Moss jumped off as well for slightly different reasons. And there was quite a clear out at the top level. And didn't those, isn't that people who sort of criticise corporate governance? A lot of people like myself and Stephen Mayne were pointing at Macquarie paying such high remuneration and Babcock paying such high remuneration. And the investors who were sort of defending that should be looking at themselves pretty closely.
Yeah, exactly. Impress you that they have, you know, they're trying to cut their costs. They've taken their cost base down about 11%. Some staff, you know, have been shown the door. They've still got a very big staff, something like over 15,000 around the world. Do those things impress you?
Well, I guess the problem, though, is when you're looking at a company like an investment bank, their assets are their people, as I say, going down the elevator every day. So Macquarie in the 2000s or 90s, 2000s, if you're an investment bank or merchant bank, debt was so cheap and assets were priced so highly, it was hard not to make money, especially what Macquarie were doing. It's a very different situation now, and similar to what sort of Andrew and Lachlan were saying, is that it's not that easy to reinvent yourself. They're not Madonna. They're an investment bank. They can't simply change the way they operate. They made billions of dollars from the ridiculous model of having captive satellites under secret management agreements that people didn't know about, and incompetent investors putting money in these satellites. Eventually, investors wised up and realised how ridiculous that was, and paying these huge fees to Macquarie was moronic. And that's where they were making their money. So how this model can how this business can continue to try and get anything near the profits they were getting in sort of the last 5 to 10 years, it just doesn't make sense to me. So it's, why would you invest in a company whose returns are never going to be what they were? Simply because it used to have a good brand doesn't mean it will have in the future. Simply because it used to make money doesn't mean it won't in the future. Companies, you look at the top 10 companies 100 years ago, none of them are around anymore, apart from maybe GE.
All right.
Things change.
I was just going to say...
Record profit, Adam, of more than $5 billion, cash profit up 19%. What did you make of that?
It's almost going back to a sort of what you could have said about Macquarie a few years ago. The NAB profit, some people have looked at NAB and say, oh, what a great result. You look at underlying profits up. But they've done that by, well, if you look at the reason profits up is because they've taken much lower bad debt charge and some other weird sort of income they've got in there that Stephen Bartholomew's talked about in Business Spectator. But really, what Cameron Klein's done is just take a massive gamble on the market. And there was an interesting quote, and he said something like, the decrease in debts was due to a reflection of the improved economic and market conditions during the year. I don't know which country Cameron Klein's living in, but has he been to Europe? Has he been to the US? Has he seen the
even here? Too.
Yeah, especially here. So Cameron Klein's taking a massive roll of the dice and hoping that the Australian housing market, especially, and commercial property market to a lesser extent, won't collapse. And I think, Helen, you know my views on that. This is a huge gamble with shareholders' money, and it comes down to the fact that people like Cameron Klein are getting big short-term bonuses for EPS and underlying profit growth, but in 2 or 3 years' time, he's taken a huge gamble with shareholders' equity. We're talking 9-10% equity versus assets. Any sort of mistake here and bye-bye bank. So it's a huge risk.
Oh, that's a big call,
I don't think this
Andrew.
Is to be praised.
Big call.
Well, I think it explains
that they are nowhere near as big in the housing market as some of the other banks.
It's a good point you make, Helen. The thing is, if you look at the level of risks in housing lending, NAB came off a low base, whereas Commonwealth came off a higher base. And the real risk, and if you look at the arrears statistics and figures, the biggest problem loans are the ones that have been made in recent years, since sort of 06, 07. They're the ones that are under the most stress due to the ridiculous first homeowners grant and the like. So they're the loans to worry about. If a loan was made in 1995 and it's almost paid off, it's less of a concern.
Yeah.
NAB's been boosting its lending in a period of great risk. This isn't the time to be chasing market share. If I was running a bank, and I'm not, I'd be battening down the hatches, getting my capital ratios up, not lending at all on LVRs of above 75%. And this, people might go,
I thought banks were still, battening down the hatches, and that, credit in certain areas was still quite hard to get.
They're not lending to businesses, but they're lending hand over fist, partially due to Basel and partially because they're stupid, lending to homeowners. And if you look at, pretty much every bank has lifted their LVRs to 95 or 97% this year. They were down at 90. So they're not doing that. What you're hearing, Helen, is right in the business, and businesses can't get money, and maybe fair enough, maybe not. But they're lending to homeowners and wantonly. And you look at the Basel rules, and they put less risk on home loans, and look what happened in the US. It's almost a carbon copy of what happened in the US. If you look at Bethany McLean's book, which was recently released, All the Devils Are Here, advise reviewers to have a read of it, because it's a very similar state of affairs as to what's happening here.